Hello, it's Fraser Myers here. What you're about to watch is the first half of the Spiked podcast live, recorded at the Battle of Ideas. The full video of the live show is exclusive to Spiked supporters, as this week's episode of the Spiked podcast Unlocked. To get access to all of Spike's content, including the Spiked podcast Unlocked, and to have unlimited access to our articles, become a supporter today by going to spiked-online.com/support. That's spiked-online.com/support. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this extra special live edition of the Spiked podcast, extended and with even more fabulous guests. I'm so excited, so glad to see so many of you here today. Before I start, I should just say to the viewers at home, which applies to none of you, of course, you're only going to get a snippet of this unless you are a Spike supporter. Then you can get some of the exclusive, juicy content that we're going to get into. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce my panel today. Of course, as ever, we always have Spike's editor, Tom Slater. Hooray! Hooray! Thrilled to be welcoming Allison Pearson, columnist I didn't even need to introduce you, but for those who don't know, she's a columnist at The Telegraph and host or co-host of the brilliant podcast Planet Normal. And to my left, the wonderful Andrew Doyle. Andrew is a writer and comedian, and his latest brilliant book is called The End of Woke. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you buy a copy at some point. And you're working on a screenplay and things like that, which we might come into, get onto as well. And we need a massive, massive round of applause for Connie Shaw, because she stepped in as a superstar substitute today. So please give her a massive welcome. And Connie is an external affairs officer at the Free Speech Union, an organisation that we all love, I believe. So today we've got three main themes that we're going to cover before we come out to you, the audience. So get thinking if there's anything you want to ask us, whether that's related to the discussion or perhaps anything in general. Nothing too personal, please. Just keep it political. The main things are no one's love life, that kind of thing.
We don't want to repeat it last year.
Absolutely, exactly.
Got very weird.
Never again. First of all, we're going to be discussing the crisis of anti-Semitism in Britain. Then we'll discuss the question of borders. Is this the most important subject of our time? And finally, we'll be looking at the state of free speech. Clearly, everyone knows there's a big problem with anti-Semitism, and I think this has been brought home in the most brutal and horrific way possible with the banning of the Maccabi Tel Aviv football team. The British police have essentially admitted that they cannot keep Jewish people safe on the streets of Britain's second biggest city. Alison, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, what is your reaction to this? This has got to be a wake-up call, if ever there was the one.
I think my first reaction is we are in the middle of an epidemic of moral cowardice, I'm afraid, in our country. We are appeasing some of the worst people because the police are afraid. And I have senior contacts in the police who tell me that their biggest fear is Muslims kicking off. So that mustn't be allowed to happen. And then the other fear is that a lot of us now have started refusing to go along with the multiculturalism has worked out absolutely brilliantly. And they are now afraid of people pointing that out. But this is absolutely outrageous. And we've got this guy, Ayub Khan, an independent member of parliament who has celebrated this Israeli team not being allowed to come to Aston Villa. And he has basically delivered a load of propaganda and misinformation. He said that this particular team was involved in scuffles in Amsterdam, in attacks. The actual fact of what happened in Amsterdam, which is documented by a court, is hundreds of Muslims in Amsterdam ambushed and set out on what was called a Jew hunt, all right? And this was not just football fans, this was any Jew they could find. They threw them into canals, they jumped out of canals. There was immense violence. So what we're seeing, as I said, is the police are appeasing these people. We've got an Islamic preacher, Astar Rashid. When the Tel Aviv team, if they come to Birmingham, we will not show them mercy. That is incitement, right? Yeah. You have any other member of any other community saying that, and that they would be done for incitement, but it's all, let's consult with community leaders. Let's do a community impact assessment. We don't want the police to do a community impact assessment for one protected characteristic. This is the United Kingdom. The police are supposed to be policing for every single one of us.
Andrew, we have a serious crisis of racism. This is probably the most significant spike in racism any of us have seen in our lifetime. Where are all the anti-racists?
Mostly cheering on the racists. I mean, it's been absolutely astonishing, hasn't it? I mean, the level of anti-Semitism, the overt expressions of Jew hatred, even in the aftermath of a pogrom, the worst tragedy against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and they couldn't wait even a day before they were celebrating that. And it's very interesting, it's the same crew that have been proudly proclaiming their anti-fascist credentials. There can't be anything more fascist, really, than cheering on the murder of Jewish people. But they're completely absent, obviously. They've been very, very quiet. I think, for me, what troubles me most about this is, I want to echo what Alison said about the cowardice of the police, because this idea of safety is something that I'm very interested in. If you think back to, if you recall, the fatwa against Salman Rushdie back in 1989, where we had a situation where we had endless debates on television about whether we should be funding the millions of pounds that it would cost to protect one of the best authors in the country from Islamist fanatics. We were having those debates, and I think we broadly failed around that time, and we did protect him. But the fact that we were even discussing about whether he brought it on himself was, I consider, a huge failure. But that question of safety nowadays is seemingly trotted out at any point that an activist wants to shut down an event, and they don't want to say that they're against free speech or anything. They will say, it's a safety issue, we cannot guarantee your security. But then, of course, what you're doing is you're blaming the wrong thing, aren't you? You should be saying, well, okay, if there's an issue with security, if you're worried about violence from certain individuals, then those are the people that you need to address. I can't help but think of the guy, is it Gideon Falter, the anti-Semitism campaigner, who was asked to move along from a pro-Palestine march because he was openly Jewish. The phrase used by the police officer was, you are openly Jewish, and therefore this is a potential public order breach, I think is what he said. The problem there isn't the man dressed in a way that identifies him as a Jew. The problem is the potential of people who would want to inflict violence upon him for being a Jew. And I think when it comes to something like this, some principles are worth paying for, right? So if it is very expensive to protect Jewish citizens at this time, then we pay it. That's what I think. And that happens in football as well.
And you saw the same kind of principle at work, I think, in the conviction, thankfully overturned, of Hamid Coxcomb, the blasphemer who burned the Quran. And in the initial court case where he was convicted, the judge used the fact that a man slashed at him with a knife as evidence that he was stirring up trouble, that he was causing trouble,
I can't believe
and that he'd brought it against himself, essentially.
I mean, that was insane, because I'd done a joke like that about a year before. I did a joke as Titania McGrath, this online character, and she'd said that the assassination attempt on Trump was proof that he is guilty of stirring up violence. And then a judge in the UK used that same logic to prosecute this man. Thankfully, it's been overturned. But that, I mean, like Alison said, how many wake-up calls do we need? I mean, that one is a violent awakening, isn't it? It's crazy. If someone peacefully protests, and it is a peaceful protest, to burn a copy of your own book. He hadn't stolen the book, it was his book. He can dispose of it as he wishes. And he was doing it outside the Turkish consulate, which, if you're going to protest against the Turkish government, that strikes me as the best place to do it. But actually, the court said that this was an example of him trying to stir it up. Where else would you protest? Crufts. What would you, that's the place to go. The Turkish government. But thankfully that was overturned. But I hate the fact that we keep getting to this point where these things go the wrong way, and then some other authority has to step in to sort it out. What happens when the higher courts are captured? That's what I want to know.
Connie, how many more wake-up calls do we need on these issues?
Well, my biggest concern that despite now that we have seen the most blatant, as we've been saying, display of racism, not just within, normal people, these elected MPs who are with twisted pride celebrating this ban, I worry that it's still not going to be enough. How many more times you'd think that after the Manchester Arena bombing, that we would think, oh God, there really is an issue here. And the fact that the Abedi brothers, why were they here? And you'd think that every time something awful like this happens, we have the synagogue attack, it still wasn't enough for people in power who can stop this from happening. And it's been generations of politicians who have been cowards on this issue. I'm worried that this still won't be enough, although now we've seen Keir Starmer and the Home Office saying they're doing everything they can to try and overturn this decision. Maybe now they're thinking, oh God, maybe everything that people have been warning about is true. But yeah, I'm still concerned that it's not enough. And there is this pattern. I was actually going to say about Hamid Koskit and how there is this repeated pattern, not only of blaming people who are attacked on themselves for encouraging it for themselves to be attacked. But there's just this complete, in politics in general, complete inversion of truth everywhere, whether it's trans ideology, whether it's Israel-Palestine, whether it's blaspheming, or whether it's Jews in this country being blamed for anti-Semitism. We're in a complete inversion of truth. And I'm still worried that this won't be enough. I don't know what it will take, and I am naturally quite a pessimistic person, although I try not to be. I worry that it's too late and something truly massive is going to have to happen for us to turn back the tide on what is frankly, and what politicians do not say clear enough, Islamist terrorism and Islamist ideology in this country.
Tom, your thoughts, please.
No, I just was reflecting on the Heaton Park synagogue attack. And in the wake of that, obviously after the initial horror of it subsided slightly, I thought something that I really didn't want to think was that I was almost surprised that it had taken this long for something like that to happen in the wake of October the 7th, in the wake of the hate marches, the way in which all of the old anti-Semitic tropes have been revived and put on steroids and dressed up as criticism of Israel, but we really know what all of that's about. I mean, it was horrific, and it was horrifically predictable at the same time. It was horrifically predictable given the name of the person who committed that attack. I mean, nominative determinism and all that, but if your son is named Jihad, maybe you should keep an eye on him. I mean, it reminds me of...
Jihad is a spiritual struggle.
It is.
Jihad has nothing to do with violence.
No, thank you for that fact check, Andrew, because that was very...
Mein Kampf means my struggle as well, but there you go.
Exactly. And you hopefully wouldn't name your son that either. So it's one of those things where... It reminds me, after the Manchester Arena attack, we found out that the first London Bridge attack, we found out that one of the perpetrators a few years previously had taken part in a documentary called The Jihadi Next Door. Hiding in plain sight doesn't really cover it, and I think it really just demonstrates, it's not even the complacency, it's the willful negligence which British Jews in particular are now having to suffer the consequences of. And I think it's really important to remember that this didn't start with October the 7th. For years now, the writing has been on the wall, not just where Islamism is concerned, but anti-Semitism is concerned. Even before October the 7th, Jews were the victims of about a quarter of all religiously motivated hate crimes in this country. There's something like 0.5% of the population of England and Wales. There were stories that you would see never managed to escape the local press. A cemetery in Kent, which was desecrated, a Jewish cemetery, desecrated 8 times in 10 years. People didn't know about any of this. And then October the 7th happens and it all just explodes out into the open. I think the main thing I'm kind of quite struck by at the moment is it's really important that we don't treat this as a problem for Jews to solve on their own, that this is a problem within our society, this is something that our own elites have allowed to happen, and also because of the fact that, as we all know, anti-Semitism is a warning sign of like a sickness in society more broadly, that a broader derangement, a flight from reason, an explosion of bigotry, and that's something which is going to inflict itself not just on the British Jewish population, who we should absolutely stand with, but anyone who stands against this ideology. So if this isn't going to be the wake-up call, I don't know what will be.
We should, while we're talking about names, last year, Yahya Sinwar was thankfully dispatched now from this earth, horrible leader of Hamas, and 300 children, male children in the United Kingdom were called Yahya last year, right? So that doesn't fill you with hope. Why are people calling their babies after this horrific individual?
And before we move on, Alison, I want to ask you your thoughts on why are the marches still going on? There is a ceasefire in the Middle East. There is potentially a pathway to peace. We can be tentatively hopeful about that. That's a more difficult step. But the hostilities between Israel and Hamas are currently not happening. The marches go on. What is your take on that?
Well, it's the wrong kind of ceasefire because it was brokered by Donald Trump, of course. So, in a way, if we were going to try and be positive for Connie, we could see that this is all out in the open now, isn't it, really? There's no hiding what it's about. Keep banging on about genocide. I'm sure we were all deeply moved this week, seeing the hostages being released. I interviewed Eli Sharabi, who'd spent 491 days in a pit of hell under Gaza. There's absolutely no doubt to me where the blame lies for these things. But there just is this, the anti-Semitic genie is out of the bottle. Can I just say, I've been reading the background to West Midlands Police, who have a track record of appeasing terrible people in our society. So if you look online, you can see a lecture from an imam in Birmingham, where Birmingham now has a third of the population is Muslim, and this guy is teaching people how to stone a woman to death. And the really important thing is that if you bury her up to the waist, her modesty will be preserved. This is happening in our country. We do not want men appearing on videos explaining how to stone women to death. It should never have got this far, and the law of the land has to now start being applied against these terrible people.
So, ever since the Online Safety Act came into force in the UK, I've been using a VPN every time I go online. And the VPN that I use and trust is Private Internet Access, or PIA for short. Now, if you weren't already aware, a VPN, or Virtual Private Network, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. So instead of giving away your personal information and your location to the world, PIA lets you change your IP address to one of 91 countries. This means you can gain access to websites and services that are only available in those locations. And it's not just that. Did you know that streaming services like Netflix and Prime Video have huge catalogues of content, but you can only access a fraction of it from your own country? Using PIA to change your location opens up a whole new world of streaming. Paying for Netflix without using PIA is a bit like paying for front row seats in the cinema, but being forced to sit in the hallway. PIA is also essential for keeping yourself safe online. It protects you from the prying eyes of hackers, internet service providers, and anyone else with an unhealthy interest in your personal information. Personally, I would never go online without it again. And because PIA is available for all platforms, I never need to worry about my safety or privacy. It works on Windows, Macs, iPhones, Androids, and more, whatever you can think of. Even better, you only need one subscription to protect yourself across all of those devices. So, sign up now to the world's most transparent VPN provider and take advantage of our special offer. Spiked viewers and listeners can get 86% off a subscription to Private Internet Access. That means you're paying just £1.67 a month. And you'll also get an extra 4 months thrown in completely for free. To take advantage of this incredible deal, just go to piavpn.com/spiked. That's piavpn.com/spiked. Signing up is totally risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. You won't regret it. So sign up now at piavpn.com/spiked. Let's move on to a discussion that overlaps slightly, although is not entirely the same thing. Let's talk a bit about immigration and borders, because it's been for some time now the number one issue according to polling. It's one of the big issues that is draining the popularity of Keir Starmer and the credibility of the political class. And it does seem as if every week there is some new horror story of people who we really, even those of us who want to be generous to people coming to this country should not have been let in. I mean, even the past week, we've seen an alleged murder of a asylum hotel worker. We've seen a woman, people have been charged for raping a woman on Brighton Beach. We had, of course, the whole Epping Ferrari where 2 people from the hotel were charged with sexual assault, one of them convicted. Andrew, this has got to be one of the issues of our time. It's become so significant, the political class can't ignore this anymore.
Well, I think it connects very well to what Alison was saying about these sort of very visible extremists within the Islamic community. And what that suggests is that there is a broader failure or a lack of expectation that people ought to integrate. And I think, back when Trevor Phillips did that survey of British Muslims for Channel 4, and that's about 7 or 8 years ago now, and the statistics on that were pretty shocking. This was a very rigorous, widespread survey, not among extremists, among British Muslims, and 52%, so a majority, thought that homosexuality should be against the law. And there was a significant proportion that was supportive of jihad, etc. Now, obviously, let's caveat that. There's a lot of Muslims who think this is abhorrent, and they think this is really not helping their lives or their community or all the rest of it. But someone has to take that in hand. I mean, if you look at the situation in Sweden, what is it now? 20% of Swedish people are now foreign-born, so 1 in 5. If you include those who are the child of foreign-born people, it goes up to almost 30%. Sweden, as a small country, has just taken in a reckless number with no expectation of assimilation and no attempt, actually. So these ghettos were able to form. Multiculturalism, which I perceive to be a deeply anti-liberal concept, which effectively segregates people and says we're going to treat you differently and we're not going to apply the law equally. I can't think of anything more racist, actually, than saying we're going to hold migrants to lower moral and legal standards. But that's what they've been doing. And actually, this is to side with the most reactionary, ultra far-right elements within the Islamic community. I'd like to hear more from what women in the Islamic community, you never see the videos of them, do you? Or gay Muslims, for example. I mean, if you look at the women in Iran who are tearing their veils off and dancing in the street and risking their lives and liberty in order to we have over 80 Sharia courts in the UK. That suggests immediately, and proves in fact, that the British government, and not just this government, but previous governments as well, right and left, have no interest whatsoever in treating citizens equally. They will say that a Sharia court has no legal standing. Well, I'm sorry, but if you're a woman who's been taken to a Sharia court, you have to defer to the judgment of old men with beards, and sometimes hooks for hands or whatever. And, sorry, that's a stereotype, but you know what I mean. Nothing against amputees, by the way. But I would say that, there's a serious problem, but I think migration is something that can be very healthy for a nation, so long as citizenship is conditional on assimilation to the core values of the nation, the host nation. Why is that controversial? I don't know, but no attempt has been made to do that.
And it is worth saying, even tying this back to the previous discussion, many tens of thousands of Israeli fans went to the World Cup in Qatar, but they can't come to the UK. Clearly, we have a problem in the UK that it's not necessarily about the Muslim world or Muslims more broadly. Tom, do you want to come in?
I think just on the illegal migration question, there's a reason that it's become so totemic. I mean, it's not just because the problem has become so bad. This Labour government, since the time that they've been in, have broken all the wrong kinds of records in terms of illegal crossings, despite claiming to want to smash the gangs. They've deported a handful of people. Meanwhile, 50,000 have come in the other direction. I think it really speaks to, first of all, a sense in which the establishment has just completely lost control, that it cannot even maintain its most basic duties to public safety, to knowing who is in the country, to being able to sort people who might have a legitimate claim to be here, and people who are quite clearly not fleeing war and oppression, but are fleeing 17 charges in Sweden, as the man who was convicted this week of issuing death threats to Nigel Farage had been convicted of. It's the sense that there is this entrenched kind of negligence bred of virtue signalling and stupidity is really embodied in the whole illegal migration question. Also, that kind of sense in which it expresses people's feeling of powerlessness over the policies which govern them, over the country in which they live. You've had successive elections in which people have voted for parties to get control over the border, and yet not only do you see legal migration shoot up, you also see the question of illegal migration totally explode. And then when these stories after stories are put before the political class and the media elite, they just start staring into the distance and talking about Winston Churchill and our responsibility towards refugees. They refuse to accept that even one of these cases is real, whether it was the migrant in Epping who was in the country only 8 days before he managed to rack up 3 sexual convictions, or it was the acid attacker in Clapham, if anyone remembers him, who came to this country illegally from Afghanistan, who was in the process of claiming asylum, was turned down once. Via a phony conversion to Christianity, he was approved on the second time around, despite the fact that he'd been convicted for 2 sexual offences in the meantime. Anyone who thinks we owe that man some kind of great debt does not deserve to hold office in this country. And I think people feel like they're going mad watching these stories proliferate, and yet nothing about it being done. I think it's really interesting, though, how the upsurge in interest in this, the agitation, the protest, has forced the political class to respond. You can always tell an issue has gotten quite bad, whether it's illegal migration or anti-Semitism or whatever, when Keir Starmer, far too late in the day, is saying something about it, and I think we've kind of reached that point. Not that we would trust him to deal with any of these issues, but at the same time I think it's telling how much the Overton window on these issues has shifted even a little bit. But I think it's going to be a central issue because it speaks to that fundamental lack of everything being out of control, and no matter how people vote, no matter what people say, no matter how reasonably they make their arguments, this isn't about demonising all migrants. It's about you allowing an enormous loophole here for all of the worst people to possibly exploit, that nothing ever happens. So until people feel like something is done about this, then it's going to continue to roil our politics, definitely.
Connie, your thoughts?
I think, well, obviously, it's the biggest problem and topic of this political generation, but my fear, again, is that at the risk of being extremely provocative, my words being interpreted in ways that I wouldn't want them to be. Even if we did in a situation I wouldn't want to shut all the borders, the way that multiculturalism has failed so drastically and the lack of assimilation, the way that our voting system works means that if you have multiple cities in this country with densely populated, concentrated populations of certain communities, you will end up with 5 MPs being elected to Parliament on a single issue, being Gaza. And so how we get around that, even if we start to control our borders properly, what do we do about what we've already got? How do we go about integrating these people who, many of them may be second-generation immigrants who are completely anti-West? Over the last couple of weeks, when the second anniversary of October 7th, seeing the protest on university campuses by students who regard themselves as anti-fascist, anti-racist, progressive people. I mean, at the University of Glasgow, there were students holding banners saying, "Glory to our martyrs." At the same university society reposted that infamous photo of the, I think, 4 Hamas senior leaders, including Sinwar, and it was a celebration of the creators of the Flood of the Free. Now, universities are not just indoctrination camps for woke ideology anymore. They are harbouring Islamist tendencies and extreme anti-Semitism. Even in 2015, I came across a BBC article where the BBC reported that 27% of British Muslims in 2015 had sympathy for the motives behind the Charlie Hebdo massacre. So how we go about tackling what we already have will become a secondary issue if we ever get control of our borders. And that, again, I don't know what the solution is to that.
Well, the Charlie Hebdo question brings us nicely on to another topic we want to discuss, free speech. Free speech is obviously a big issue that spiked campaigns on. I don't know whether it's got better or worse in the middle of all of our campaigning, but Tom, do you want to reflect on some of the key issues around free speech? I mean, it's a problem, a transatlantic problem.
Yeah.
Even in the land of the First Amendment, you have cases like Charlie Kirk. What are your thoughts?
No, I think the assassination of Charlie Kirk is really worth dwelling on, because I think what that represented in all its horror was the sort of militarisation of cancel culture, really. It's the logical endpoint of all of the arguments that we've been facing down, sometimes just sort of laughing out of the room over the course of the past 10 years or more. I think when people would say speech is violence, it was tempting previously to kind of almost mock it as just the kind of cry of the permanently offended. Of course it isn't, shut up. But obviously built within that is the idea that if speech is violence, then there's two solutions to that, either censorship, as we've seen on this side of the pond, or violence, as we've seen in America, where because of the First Amendment, people feel almost compelled to take action into their own hands. So it's the thing about wokeness and identity politics and political correctness, whatever we're going to call it, is that because it is so ridiculous and absurd and irritating, it's tempting to miss what actually at root of it is, which is that it can be something that potentially can be genuinely menacing to a society. It's not only kind of upended a lot of things that we thought we all held that around questions of equality, around questions of rights, the kind of way in which a kind of new racialism has been rehabilitated. But also fundamentally, it's something that doesn't really believe in the whole kind of Western liberal Enlightenment project and sees violence as an entirely legitimate response to people who say things that they happen to dislike. So obviously the issues with freedom of speech are very different on either side of the pond. But at the same time, I think what we really need now is a reckoning with that ideology and a genuine attempt to sort of displace it from institutions in which it continues to hold a significant amount of sway. I think it's telling that even with the populist upsurge that we've seen, even with Donald Trump being returned to the White House for a second time, this stuff lingers. And I think the one thing that we've really got to caution against, whether it's on the free speech issue, the gender issue, Islamism or whatever, is a sense of complacency that can set in when a few elections might go in a more interesting direction. There's just so much more work that needs to be done, obviously, in terms of tackling this stuff.
People may or may not be aware, but we are in this room in the presence of a thought criminal. Alison had the...
I decided not to go in for breaking into people's houses, but I just put some shit on social media, Can I just say, actually, we should all pause and think, because this is National Hate Crime Awareness Week.
It comes around quicker every year.
And the police have been rolling this out, and you can just Google this, and they will be inviting people. So if there's anyone in here who's felt, alarm or distress by anything anybody you've overheard in the street has said, if you haven't reported them to your local police, shame on you, quite frankly, because how are we going to keep those police busy? I would quite like to have a national "You've Stolen My Bike Again" week, or national "Could I have someone round to investigate my burglary" week. But no, the police are quite seriously. You can see this stuff, and as Fraser said, it's almost a year ago now that I had two police at my door talking about the fact I had posted something on social media, which I deleted a year earlier, but I asked them what was the tweet, and they said they weren't allowed to tell me. And then I said, what is the name of my accuser? And they said, we're not allowed to tell you that either, madam, but it's not the accuser, it's the victim. So, I mean, there are, as we know, there are countless cases since my own case. We've seen the Julian Fuchs of the Brexity books. We've famously seen Andrew's great, co-writer, the great Graham Linehan, arrested absolutely disgracefully by 5 armed police. But I've had first-person experience of this, and in a way I'm glad. I'm glad because I've really got to delve down into it. What is going on is the police are committed to hate crime, and this dates back to the Macpherson report, which found the Metropolitan Police institutionally racist. You cannot be promoted in the police unless you mouth a load of mantras about diversity is our strength. So all of the senior police now have been brought up in the school of Macpherson as self-loathing police hierarchy, which is committed to policing according to protected characteristics. Just coming back to our first topic, Jews do not count. Some people might think they were among the most persecuted people of the 20th century, what with 6 million of them being murdered, but no. As far as the British police are concerned, Jews and Judaism are not a protected characteristic because I've been told that they're seen as white supremacists. So if you want to know why the police can't be asked to get out and protect Jewish people, that's why it is. And we're seeing some pushback now. We've just got in the House of Lords Toby Young of the Free Speech Union and Lord Bernard Howe. Yes, is it? No, it's dubbed Hogan Howe. They are now saying they want an amendment to the Police and Crime Bill which will stop the hate crime. 30 people a day are being arrested for mainly nonsense. And as we've said, people can be, anybody here can be reported. You could be reported by a complete stranger for something they've been offended by. And we don't just need to get rid of non-crime hate incidents, which are absolutely ludicrous and a waste of police time. I would say we need to get rid of hate crime entirely and get back to policing actual crime that frightens people.
Connie, 30 people a day means thousands of people per year, and that statistic is just to do with the Communications Act, I believe. There are many, many laws on the books that allow the police to arrest people for speech. Alison also mentioned non-crime hate incidents. How bad is it out there for free speech in the UK?
So, as you can probably imagine, I have these conversations with my colleagues very regularly that you may hear about these stories in the press and think that the stories that you hear about are in the press because they are so outrageous and so rare that they make it into the papers. The reality is you are seeing the tip of the iceberg. It's so much worse than most people would ever imagine, what we are dealing with at the Free Speech Union. We've never been as busy as we are at the moment since the Free Speech Union was founded at the start of 2020. We have never been so overworked, but yeah, just insanely busy. And the good thing is that now that we have been able to, the Free Speech Union and the Academy of Ideas and many other great organisations have been able to raise the alarm. Claire Fox was telling me the other day how, that makes it feel like sometimes that it's a really bad problem because we didn't know about it before and now we do, and it's in the public eye. It feels really bad. But at least we're talking about it. But that being said, it's still even worse than what you're seeing in the press. And like you were saying, Fraser, that stat about 30 people a day, which came from an freedom of information request that the Times did, that's just for 2 offences. I think one under the Communications Act and one under the something to do with malicious Communications Act. So the number is probably higher because it's just 2 offences. And like you say, we have not just communications offences, but basically hate speech laws, which I agree with you, Alison, that I don't think we should have hate speech laws in this country, because as soon as you give that power to the state to decide what is and isn't acceptable, then that's when you're in serious trouble. So the problem is far worse than I think anyone, including myself, could imagine.
And Andrew, you've been working in the United States with the great Graham Linehan, working on a sitcom, and famously, as soon as he stepped foot in the UK, he was greeted by 5 armed police officers. This story has crossed the Atlantic.
Yeah.
People are talking about it in the US. Do they think we've gone completely fucking nuts?
Yeah, they do. I got off a plane last night. Why wasn't I arrested? I'm a bit gutted, to be honest.
Now's your chance to say something.
It's the only reason I'm here.
National hate crime awareness, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly.
Go for it.
But then, I mean, that sounds flippant. But then, on the other hand, when we did, I don't know if you remember when the Scottish hate crime bill came in a couple of years ago, and it was so draconian, it was so extreme. They were setting up hate crime reporting centres in mushroom farms and sex shops and you could go along and report anyone. In fact, the most reported person was Humza Yusuf at the time, which was great. But we did a special hate crime, Comedy Unleashed hate crime special in Edinburgh on the first day that bill came in, and people were genuinely saying to me, make sure your phone is turned off, make sure the police can't. I'm like, are you kidding? Like, what's going on? And we didn't get arrested, which is good. But the thing is, yeah, they do think we're nuts. I think people in America, because there is there's a thing called the First Amendment, and there is broad agreement, I think, not among the crazies, but on the left and right, that actually free speech is kind of a good thing. Yeah. They've sort of borrowed that idea from us as we've let it go. I think that's why the Charlie Kirk murder is so extremely shocking, because that was a man who was going to university campuses specifically to provide a platform for those who disagreed with him and to hear them out. And he made a real effort to do that. I think what was particularly shocking for me it feels like an attack on the principle of free speech. If you're going to a university campus to open up discussion and you are murdered for that, that's why I think it's resonated so much, as well as the fact that obviously murder is abhorrent anyway, and he was so young, and all the rest of it. And then in the aftermath of that, you saw everyone. I mean, I think what's really stuck with me about that, political violence obviously happens from time to time, and it's horrific. It's very rare. which is why I don't trust these stats about which side is more violent, left or right, because actually I saw one stat which suggested that over 70% of violence was coming from the right. If you expanded it by 1 year, the stats would have flipped over to the left, because it is so rare, so you can massage the figures like that. The key thing isn't the propensity of political violence itself, it is the reaction to it from the mainstream. What was so fascinating was mainstream leftist commentators trying to downplay that murder, trying to find excuses for it, trying to cherry pick quotations that Kirk had said out of context, which completely misrepresented his position. And all of that was creating a kind of sense of, well, maybe he was asking for it. Again, that seems to be a particular problem on the mainstream left, I have to say. But as I say, there is more of a broad agreement in America that free speech matters. I think as far as the UK goes, I mean, I feel like that's one of the reasons I've left. I daren't check, because apparently you can ask to see if you've got any non-crime hate incidents against you.
Yeah.
I've probably got a list, right? I mean, I daren't check. But the thing about it is, I want to echo what Alison said about actually doing something. It's great to see Toby Young in the House of Lords calling for the end of non-crime hate incidents. You know, we've been saying that for a long, long time. They shouldn't even be there. But where is the political will? Like, this has been a problem with the Conservatives, it's been a problem with Labour. Everyone they have this essential belief that words, if they're not contained or controlled, lead to violence. So actually we need a complete overhaul. The ending of non-crime hate incidents is the start. We have hate crime legislation encoded in the Public Order Act, Malicious Communications Act, and Communications Act. And we're talking about things like if you cause alarm or distress, which is actually codified into law as being illegal. Communications Act, if you post something grossly offensive, that's well, I consider laws against speech grossly offensive, but no one's hauling the government into court. I would say we need to scrap all of that. We need to establish clearly what incitement to violence means. So it doesn't mean a mother and childminder tweeting something in anger and then deleting it within an hour that has no possibility of causing violence at all. And we have these debates about whether she incited, I'm talking about Lucy Connolly, of course. Yeah. Of course not. And in fact, in America, they have a very clear guidance on this called the Brandenburg test, which says that to prove incitement to violence, it has to be intended to do so, there has to be imminent risk of it, and it has to be likely to do so. So that means someone in a position of power directing their followers in the immediate situation to commit an act of violence. That doesn't apply to someone idiot saying something stupid on Twitter. I'm not saying Lucy Connolly's an idiot, by the way. I'm saying that people put stuff online without thinking that they later regret. And I don't think the guy Samuel Williams should be prosecuted for saying something stupid about burying Zionists. It's horrible, but he's an idiot kid, isn't he? And there isn't really any potential for that to cause violence. So I think scrapping hate speech laws. Oh, and one more thing while we're at it. Let's just scrap protected characteristics. Let's just get rid of them. I mean, I think, sorry, I'm rambling, but I think that might be at the heart of the problem here. We're so identity obsessed now that we think we should pigeonhole everyone. Ultimately, if someone attacks me, I don't care why they attack me, if it's because I'm gay or whatever. It doesn't matter. They've attacked me, they've broken the law, just apply the law. Why not just do that? Why do we need a separate, the only protected characteristic should be citizen. That's it.
But we have just quickly on Lucy Connolly. So Lucy did write a tweet. She was horrible and totally out of character, which she, as Andrew says, she took down. She was denied bail. I think that was a political decision. And let's just have a look at the charming Mr. Holy War al-Shamsi, who attacked the Manchester synagogue. 2 charges of rape, given bail, right? How is violence, suspected violence against women, that person is allowed to go on bail with not only to mention his 3 wives, which is illegal the last time I looked in our country. So we have this absolute abject 2-tier justice, and I think it all wraps back round to our earlier topics of multiculturalism. The authorities are scared. They have created this problem. They have no answers to it. And the only answer to it is anybody who objects, anyone like Lucy who says, I don't like these migrant hostels, which millions of mums and fathers are scared for their daughters walking past these places with good reason, right? The people in Epping, a 14-year-old girl, this guy was 8 days off the boat, sexually assaulted 2 women. We don't want him in our country, and we should be allowed to say say so. But they want to criminalise those of us who don't like the way their diversity is our strengths plan is unravelling.
Tom?
No, there are so many horrific cases. I mean, there's the Lucy Connolly case, obviously, which has been pretty well reported on, narrated. There was also a gentleman in the wake of the Southport riots called Jamie Michael, who we interviewed recently for Spiked, ex-Royal Marine, served his country, makes a video for Facebook in the aftermath of Southport, in which he, expresses himself in slightly intemperate terms, but broadly speaking, just calls for public meetings with politicians to tackle the issue of illegal migration, says we need protection around schools and parks, was, working under the assumption, whilst that kind of misinformation was swirling after Southport, that it was a kind of radicalised Islamist asylum seeker, but nevertheless wasn't calling for violence, quite the opposite. He was held on remand for 17 days. Because he was one of the few people who pleaded not guilty, they kept him inside for a very long time until the Free Speech Union found out about him and managed to get him home and to get his tag removed. And yet he was put before a jury and they acquitted him in 17 minutes. And there, I think, you see where there is some hope, which is that we've been writing about this issue for a very long time, and people struggle to care about it until quite recently. I think, and understandably so, because it was something which didn't necessarily encroach upon their lives. There wasn't so much attention given to it. There weren't so many horrific examples that you could read in the newspaper every single day of the week. But as bad as things have gotten, that's also generated a pushback. People can see these laws not only as illiberal, but cruel, as things that ruin lives. It's not nothing to arrest someone. It's not nothing to hold them in prison. It's not nothing to deprive them of their liberty for nothing else than what they have said. And people are really starting to reckon with it now. And on a more kind of optimistic note, I suppose, the fact that we've got organisations like the Free Speech Union now, which we really didn't have, in terms of pushing back on a day-by-day basis against whether it's cancel culture, whether it's the attempts to use the law to go after political opponents, all of that is very much welcome and I think has genuinely shifted the dial. The fact that this has become a live political issue, something which is being really one of the many albatrosses hanging around Keir Starmer's neck, is really significant, and it seems very likely that at the next election you're going to see a lot of this cleared away. That's immensely positive, but I think the thing we could be most positive about is amongst just the population. People are not willing to be cancelled anymore. They're not willing to put up with seeing their fellow citizens having their collars felt for saying something that they themselves happen to agree with. And that's a tremendous thing to build on, I think, if we're going to mount the kind of free speech fight back that we need.
Thank you so much for watching the first half of the Spike podcast live, and thank you to our friends at Private Internet Access for sponsoring us. Now is the time to take control of your digital life and get PIA for 86% off. You can find the link in the description below or scan the QR on screen. And if you're a Spike supporter, this episode doesn't end here. You can now watch the second half of our live discussion on the Spike's podcast Unlocked. Just go to the Spike website, log in, and you'll see it on the homepage. See you there.